Thank you for a very nice presentation. Now I'd like to introduce our public sector panel, which includes Ralph Johnson, who's the CISO of the County of Los Angeles, Steve Musembwa, who's the CISO for the City of Long Beach, and Veronica Mitchell, who's Information Security Officer for the City of Santa Monica. Our panel is going to be moderated by Marian Merritt, who's the lead for industry engagement for the National Initiative for CyberSecurity Education at NIST. So panelists and moderator, please.
Great. I'll also stay hydrated. Thank you so much for all that. Hi, everybody.
Steve?
There. Where's Steve? Oh, there he is. Making an entrance.
Yeah,
you gotta love it. So hello, everybody. I'm Marian Merritt, and I'm going to guess in this room we have a pretty good level of familiarity with NIST, right? Okay, nodding heads. How about NICE, the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education? Okay, so if you'll bear with me, let me just take a moment to explain the work that we do, because it's open to public participation. So we are focused on the workforce side. Anybody who's hiring and knows the pain points around hiring good staff in cybersecurity, you will want to come and learn about some of the resources we have. You'll be very familiar with things like non-regulatory frameworks, and we have one for cybersecurity workforce. We also have public working groups focusing on cybersecurity opportunities like apprenticeships, collegiate competitions, training and certifications. For example, all the certifications out there in cybersecurity have been mapped to the workforce framework. So if you're looking at your staff and you want to see what they can do to demonstrate competency and continue to move on a career pathway, hey, we've got great resources for you. So I would encourage you to visit our website, which is at nist.gov/nice, and you'll be able to see a lot more about the work that we do. So I'm extremely excited to share with you some of the insights from this public sector working group. As you've heard, we have Veronica Mitchell, who is with the City of Santa Monica, Stephen Musembwa, is I'm saying that correctly, from Long Beach, and Ralph Johnson, who's the CISO for LA County. So show of hands, who here lives in Santa Monica? Okay. Couple of you, Long Beach, anybody made the drive? Oh, excellent.
I just got here, but.
So I'll give you $1 later, thank you. I had to make some calls. Okay, what about LA County? Come on, all of us, right? So you are the constituents, you are the customers. You gotta be very interested in what they have to say. So I think we can all agree that not a day goes by without some story hitting the news about cities and data breaches. And we're not going to have a moment of mourning for our brethren at those communities, but be they in Florida, Wisconsin, New York, Ohio, and Maryland, there's been a drumbeat of bad news, right? That also means there's a lot of attention being focused on the work being done in the public sector. And at a recent mayoral conference, 1,400 mayors from the United States got together and said, we will not pay ransomware. We will not pay these bribes. Because, if you're running for office, you're never going to get elected saying, I'm going to pay the bribe, right? So that's a painful thing. We understand the motivations, but let's focus here on the day-to-day work that's being done to stay ahead of the threats while continuing to improve city services for all of us and the systems that are being delivered with technology. So I think we can agree public sector cybersecurity executives are dealing with the exact same issues in the private sector, plus smaller budgets, longer decision-making processes, restricted purchasing windows, competing constituencies with different agendas, and lots of public scrutiny. So we citizens, all of us, we want more, right? We want more from our cities and counties than ever before. We want city services delivered on our devices, right? We want parking that recognizes our vehicle when we pull into the lot and the gate comes up and we don't have to engage because we've set up an account and registered our credit cards. There's no privacy concerns there. Portals that engage city and county services. I live in Los Angeles. I got the 311 app, graffiti, boom, they're on it. It's great. But what data am I sharing besides, where am I driving and where I live and other private information like that? Libraries. You can request, receive, and have delivered on your device all kinds of entertainment and material from the libraries. I have no idea what information is being stored about me. I have no idea who the vendor is. So there's a lot of trust. So as we think about these things and as we engage with the panelists, think about questions you're going to have for them at the end, because you're the constituents, right? But I kept hearing the refrain in my head, doing more with less. So that may be the extreme of the challenges for the folks up here, but I think you will find that each of our panelists is very optimistic, forward-thinking, and creative in resolving these challenges of being a public sector CISO. So with that, I'm hoping that each of you could just do a little self-introduction, share a little bit about your background and where you've come, and what is the chain of command or the structure that you're involved in with you and your staff as well as vendors to solve the problems in your community. So if we can start with you here, Ralph.
Sure. Ralph Johnson, Chief Information Security Officer, County of Los Angeles. I've been a government employee for almost 30 years now. In about 2 weeks, it'll be 30 years. Wow. Most of that time was spent at King County in Seattle, Washington. Started in 1989. Began as an autopsy assistant at the medical examiner's office.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, think about it. Quite a career change, right? But I was the
It's all
chief,
forensics.
yeah, exactly. I was the Chief Information Security and Privacy Officer in King County for 14 of those 28 years. Been in Los Angeles County for about 14 months, so I'm new to the area. I don't even know where I am at the moment. Lyft brought me here, so hope that they can get me back to my office. Los Angeles County is a very interesting organization to work for. It's like working with 34 independent companies. Every department functions very independently of one another, but we try to provide some oversight, some governance, some direction, strategic alignment across information security in all 34 departments. But government is kind of an interesting beast to work for. When you went to high school and you learned about the branches of the federal government, you learned that there was an executive branch, a judicial branch, and a legislative branch, right? Well, as you move down to through the jurisdictions, you find that there are more branches than 3, because every elected official has this concept of separation of powers. So I can't tell the sheriff's office what they can do and can't do because I have no legal authority over them because they're a separately or independently elected individual. Same thing goes for the district attorney's office. Even though they're part of Los Angeles County, we have to work more through collaboration than we do through ordinance or directive or whatever term you want to use. So it's very interesting, and I'm sure these folks from the cities have similar stories about independently elected department heads, and I'm not sure how these 2 cities are organized, but I've seen it in other cities as well. So.
Thank you.
Yes, so I'm Veronica Mitchell. As you mentioned, I work for the city of Santa Monica. I've been there for all of a year, a little over a year. And as far as how the city is structured, we have about 14 business units. However, we're a centralized function per the CIO's direction. I report to the CIO, and I oversee security for all 14 of those areas, including the police department, the water department, library, and the like. It's still a collaborative effort required, regardless of whether or not I can set directives. I still want to make sure that they buy into those directives, and you do that by collaborating with those people. So you still have that relationship building that takes place, and I've been there for about a year, and I certainly spent my time building relationships. So I guess that's about it for now.
I'm Steve Musembwa, City of Long Beach Chief Security Officer. I've been there for about a year now. As far as the structure, it's set up, we have what you call a city manager, who's the equivalent of a CEO in a corporation. And under him, department heads One of the departments is TID, which is Technology Department, headed by CIO, who I report to. I report to the CIO. So that's kind of the hierarchy. There is some separation. We have a water department, which is kind of has a person in charge of security, but the rest of the departments kind of fall under the CISO, the fire department, the police department, and then the multiple other departments as well. Like my two colleagues here on the floor, we collaborate a lot because we got a city council that we have to deal with, which is kind of equivalent of the board of directors. But as Ralph mentioned, these are elected individuals who have their own ideas of how things should run. So you have to kind of collaborate with them when you think about cybersecurity, pretty much.
Great. Okay. So one of the things that is particular to public sector work is some real issues around legacy, right? So back in 2015, there was a federal study that found that 75% of the federal IT spend was just on keeping legacy systems afloat. And so, there's been attention paid, Congress is aware, and there's been executive orders and budget to home in on that. But a recent GAO report said that there are a handful of systems that are 40 and 50 years plus old, right? So if you go on Indeed.com right now for the Washington, D.C. area and look for a job listing with Fortran as a requirement, there are 125 open positions.
Wow.
So, job security is great if you went to college in the dark ages like I did, because I took Fortran in college. It came
So did
out,
I. Maybe we ought to move to DC.
I think we got a big business as consultants, Fortran came out in 1957, people. I didn't even know that, there were systems around that could still be running today. So job security is one thing, but I think we can agree that that's a concern. So in the public sector, we have these concerns about managing legacy systems, even if they're not 50 years old. But then we also, as you've heard the benefits story today, we want to move to the cloud. So let's talk about what's unique in the public sector space when it comes to decision-making, budgeting, and the ability to accommodate that kind of change. So for example, Ralph, you had mentioned when we talked that it's not just managing legacy systems, but you also referred to that distributed kind of organization. So you have multiple installations of, similar products, but different vendors.
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit more about that, and from a technology policy directive kind of way, what you can do to address that.
Well, I'm still working on that, frankly. What we can do to address that. We do have a major focus in the county on trying to eliminate legacy systems. But some of the things that we're going to talk about throughout the course of this is that it's difficult to do. It's difficult to find legacy systems. One of the interesting things in all my years in government, one of the themes that always comes out from our business units is we are different from everybody else. We can't go buy off-the-shelf software. And that's one of the reasons that we end up having these legacy systems. We've customized this blasted thing so many times over the 30, 35, 40 years of using this old mainframe system that we can't get off-the-shelf software that will do it because we're so unique. My true experience is that's nonsense. They're not that unique. You can get off-the-shelf software, but you need to adjust your processes. And that's the other thing that I find government doesn't want to do. And I've seen it so much more since I came to LA than I did up at King County, is that this unwillingness to change processes. We've done it this way for so long, it works, may be dysfunctional, but it does work. So why should we change it? When I told you I used to be worked at the medical examiner's office, and prior to that, I was a funeral director. And I know, I'm strange. But when I was going to mortuary school, one of the big themes that came out was, funeral directors are very traditional. They've done things the same way forever. And the phrase that they always used is, if it's not broken, why fix it? Well, you know, in my going through school, my philosophy was, why not fix it if you can make it better and service your customers even better? So that's kind of a theme that I've taken throughout the rest of my career. Let's find ways to do it better and more efficiently and cut down on some of the costs, and that way we can use the money that we've got to buy other things like that wonderful framework that the guy just showed us, right? Because I doubt that any of us can afford that.
No.
No? You know?
Right now.
So,
Okay, great. Steve, let me turn to you. When we spoke, you suggested that there was a major legacy issue around support, and I think we've alluded to it with those Fortran developers. You know, the people who've worked a long time on these issues, 25 years, they've maxed out, they're going to retire, that knowledge leaves with them. So what kind of things are you doing to sort of deal with that?
Yeah, so we had a situation where I guess it was a legacy issue where we're performing an assessment on a system where we had to retrieve some data. Unfortunately, the expert on that system had just retired. He had been with the city for about 30 years. And so we thought about maybe, bringing somebody like a consultant to do the task. And as you mentioned, we found out pretty quickly there's not a lot of people out there right now with those skills or who are looking for work in that area. Hence the mention you made about the jobs that are available for that. So what happened was the way the pension system works is when somebody retires, you can bring them back after 6 months on a part-time basis. So we managed to work out a deal where he will be able to come back and work on a part-time basis and help out in that particular task. So it was just kind of a workaround, but without that, we were kind of stuck either having to pull somebody from another department who's got that skill set to do that. So eventually, that was a problem. So eventually, we're trying to upgrade that legacy system to a newer technology so we don't have to deal with that problem in the future. So that's an example of
Yeah, trying to get the city fathers, they used to call them city fathers, city parents,
City
understand that this is going to be an area of focus
Right.
and investment.
Yes.
It's just not sexy, right? You
Right,
know?
right.
So Veronica, let's think about this in a related way when we were discussing like on-prem versus cloud and how it's different for the public sector. And so can you give us some insight for Santa Monica? How are you guys looking at this and things like engaging your vendor, the procurement side and the
Right.
requirements? Tell me a little bit about
Right,
that.
I was explaining to Marian that we actually have a process where when individuals are requiring services from a vendor, they reach out to the ISD staff and they go through our project management process. So they let us know what their requirements are, and we then determine what is the best vendor that meets their needs. And when we have like a cloud service provider that they really are gun-ho and they want to go with that particular vendor, then they have to fill out what I call is a vendor information security assessment form. And we evaluate that information, the information security team. They also have to have, that vendor has to provide us with some type of SOX type 2 assessment. We review that, and we also have a means of using a tool, BitSite. I heard someone speak of it, I think it was, we use BitSite to kind of do an internet scraping of that actual vendor to see what their external facing applications look like. If you're going to do business with cities, we want to see what kind of, how well you're doing with the security within your own organization before we give you access to our data and that kind of thing. So then we perform an assessment of that vendor, and then from there, my recommendations is, they look like they have pretty good security controls in place, or I think maybe we should probably look other places. So that's the process for that.
Would you say that kind of vendor vulnerability assessment practice is standard, or is that something currently being more increasingly adopted?
I think it's standard for some, I guess.
Yeah.
I have heard of other organizations or agencies who are also adopting that methodology, and it stemmed from us because in prior environments where I worked, there were problems with the vendor going out of business and the data being overseas, and we had no way of retrieving our data. or even contacting the vendor because, of course, they stop answering their phones. So, we just have to have some type of, and also involved in this process is there is a clause within our contract with legal that says that in the event, things go awry, the relationship goes bad, you'll give us access to our data. So we have those kinds of mechanisms in place.
Okay.
I don't find that as being too standard yet, but I have noticed that third-party vendor management, risk assessments are starting to become more prevalent. And I think that due to a recent breach in LA County of LA County data, it was a third party that got breached. You may have read it in the paper, Namaji, about 14,000 county customers or citizens, information was breached through this third-party vendor recently. And it's finally getting third-party vendor management issues and risk management issues before the Board of Supervisors, and they're finally starting to pay attention.
Yeah, we do similar to the city of Santa Monica, where we assess third-party vendors as well through a risk assessment process, and do kind of a background check on them, like a credit report type scan. We do on this side as well before they can touch our systems. We want to make sure that they're proper vendors, secure, they've got proper policies in place, and we know where they'll be storing the data for the city. If it's not like a different jurisdiction, that kind of stuff. So we do an assessment as well before we bring them on board as well. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the new services we're providing in the city, smart city, and also Internet of Things initiatives. So, we hear a lot from vendors that this is a great way to consumerize your citizens' experience, and you can improve responsiveness. We're also seeing a lot of demand from public safety, law enforcement. So, for example, City of Long Beach was recognized as a top 10 digital city. And, Santa Monica, you've been in this space for a while. They were providing high-speed internet to low-income residents, for a number of years now. So pretty forward-thinking, and I know county's got open data portal. There's a lot of trend towards transparency. So what are some of these IoT and smart city initiatives, and in any particular order, that you're managing right now? And what kind of collaboration is going on with you and with IT, as well as some of the, the elected officials, because they have a lot of interest in seeing this happen. So
I'll let these folks address it first, and because they're cities.
We have a few apps that, in essence, are bringing citizens to City Hall. That's the concept. So there's one app called Go Long Beach that you could use as a citizen to report like graffiti or a garbage truck that is in the road, or like a car in downtown.
Okay.
So it's an app that uses your location, like GPS locator, to figure out where you are, and you can report the incident. So they can pick it up. They can pick up your location and track it, and respond to the incident. It does gather some personal data on the person who uses it. So those are the kind of issues that usually, when IT is creating apps, I like to kind of know and be involved to just understand what kind of data they're collecting, what options the citizen has, if they could turn off the locator information, for example, if they have that option, and if we're storing data, where are we going to store it, what kind of controls we have around it. So it's a collaboration with IT. We do get involved when they're creating apps like that. There's another app called Go Long Beach Library, Public Libraries, where you can book a book in the library, CDs, but again, you have your personal information in there. The business and IT usually are quick to push apps out, but from the security side, we like to collaborate with them and just know what exactly is going on, what data they're collecting. So we're thinking from a security standpoint, privacy standpoint, how we're going to manage, where we're going to store the data, and what kind of controls we have around that. There's a couple of more apps, but usually it's the same issue.
And are they all home developed?
Both. Some are developed in-house, but some are collaborated with third-party vendors. Yeah.
Oh, I'm surprised to learn that. Okay. Veronica?
So I know that we have one particular solution or tool where if we engage with homeless people on the street, And that's with the police department. They gather information about those individuals, try to get them help, and if they see them on the streets again, they continue to gather that information. And then they began to gather that information for purposes of, okay, we see these types of people in these types of areas. How do we go about getting these types of people help that they need, and how do we go about making sure that they actually utilize the help that we're actually getting them? I heard of this in random, just having lunch with someone who was over this program, and I just kept hearing privacy issues, because I was like, so what information are we gathering here? And that's when, privacy buzzwords came out. They were like, oh, no worries, we have legal involved in these conversations. I was like, oh, that's wonderful. I probably should be involved in those conversations too, so I can know about the application and making sure we have the security controls in place, to properly secure the data. So we have those types of things that crop up. We also have, I know there's one thing that we're looking at. It's something in the pipeline. It's not been released just yet. We're sort of looking into it. We're going to have like this little MIDI. It's called an Audi bus from our pier that it'll ride like maybe from here to here for purposes of translocating people from one location to the next. But it's a smaller segment right now, and it's just something that they're looking into. It does have some type of smart city technology or smart technology embedded within it. But it's still in its infancy stages, so it's sort of like I'll have to wait and see how that spans out. So those are the only two that I can really think of right now, other than what you kind of mentioned. We do have the little app where if you go to the library, you can purchase books and do whatever from the library. Or if you come down to the city hall, we're looking into implementing kiosk machines. So if you're waiting outside for services, you don't necessarily have to wait inside. You can use an app, and it'll let you know when your number is ready or when you're up for services that you can receive. So.
Okay, so I was at a conference from one of the big telecom providers, and they were very excited about their smart city options. And some of the things they wanted to offer were, sensors in the street lights, so that they are sort of dimmed until they detect people walking down the street or cars, and then they would become brighter. Yeah. Certainly law enforcement and the use of CCTV. I mean, gosh, I watch a lot of British television, and even though GDPR comes from Europe, boy, you don't have a sense of privacy walking down the street, and certainly in London, right? I think they've shown that you're on like hundreds of cameras every block, right? So we're not quite there in the US, but there are these, smart city initiatives with some benefits around cost savings and reduction in light pollution and crime and, law enforcement. What kind of things are being asked of you with regard to that, and, what have you been researching?
Well, I will say from the camera's perspective, not necessarily smart cameras, but I have had an assessment performed just of security as a whole, and just making sure we have the appropriate securities in place as it relates to cameras. And we change default passwords, and we upgrade firmware. The basic stuff, right? We're a city. We move slowly, but we move, and the city of Santa Monica is pretty progressive in its initiative to be a digital city, if you will. So we just have to make sure that we consider appropriate security controls as we move. We go through this process we're in this process called digital transformation, right? So that means that we're digitizing data as opposed to you having to sign. This is one of the weird things, because I've only been in the city life for a couple of years now. Prior to that, I worked in the Department of Defense, where we have digital signatures already. But one interesting thing about the cities is that you have to have wet signatures, right? So that means that for those who do not know what wet signatures means, that means you need someone has to physically sign a document, and then someone takes that particular document, let's say a delivery person, takes that document and sends it to the next person so that you can get the other signature. And that actually takes place with vendors. So you're trying to get a contract signed, but you need that wet signature in order to process that. Is that a long process?
Very long.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of unique with governments, I've noticed, is that, they love to have that wet signature. I recently was sent a form that I needed to sign for one of our other departments. And so I found a way to digitally sign it. And I sent it back to them, and they returned it to me, and they said, we can't accept this. And they said, you have to print it out, sign it, then re-PDF it back to us. And so I did that, and I pointed out to them that you now are accepting a less legally binding document than the original one that I sent you, because you cannot prove that that is my signature on that. You can't prove that I didn't go ask somebody else to sign it for me. But they didn't care. They didn't care. And it's interesting because the federal government published the digital signature legislation back in the 90s. I don't remember the exact date, but it was back in the night. I mean, we're talking over 20 years ago. And governments, local governments especially, still can't seem to grasp the concept of digital signatures.
I'm newly grateful as a remote employee for the federal government that they accept electronic signatures.
Yeah,
I couldn't function
we're
otherwise.
moving closer to it in LA County. You know, we're getting there. We're getting people to understand that they are legitimate, that they are legally binding, and we're looking at several. But again, it's another one of those interesting things that each department wants their own vendor instead of finding a single vendor that covers the entire county. And you know, that tends to cost more. You get less higher per license costs. You get higher support costs, higher implementation costs, all of those sorts of things. You lose a lot of economies of scale by doing this at the department level. And again, governments don't seem to get that.
So before we leave this topic of, you know, smart cities, I know that, Stephen, when we spoke a little bit about some of the particular interests for Long Beach, and one of them sort of struck me as garbage can sensors.
Right.
Garbage can sensors.
Well,
Or sensors. It's just one more thing on the network, right? More devices.
yeah, so that's more in the future, I would
Oh,
say.
this is something in the
Yes,
future.
more in the future, but what we're thinking about is as you bring more smart technology, looking at overall cybersecurity framework, as we're bringing in more IoT, more equipment that you can use to locate issues, we want to include that in our overall cybersecurity framework. So kind of merging the cybersecurity framework with the smart city strategy, and just make sure that you're looking at all facets like confidentiality, integrity, availability, and then on the IoT side, the safety and then resiliency aspects of it. But that's more of a future thing. The sensors on a garbage truck is not
Fair
implemented
enough.
quite as yet. Yeah.
Fair enough. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about something very near and dear to my heart, which is recruitment, staffing, and of course, retention issues. I mean, look, your teams are relatively small, considering the incredible scope of your work. So I think we're all very interested to know, you know, how do you cope with that? What are some of the strategies? And then, you know, what are career pathways like working in the public sector and government? You know, does it take longer to hire people? How many people are involved in the decision? Are you dealing with unions? You know, what are some of the constraints that you deal with? We'll talk about those negatives, and then we'll maybe find some positives as well. But what can you share with regard to your teams in that process?
Well, I hope that we can find some positives in the hiring process because,
We're
you
all
know,
here.
if anybody can point out some positives in LA County's hiring process, please tell me because I haven't found any yet. To be honest with you, I have not actually hired anyone since I started, but I have been worked with some of the departments that do that are in the hiring process, and I have not seen processes this antiquated since the 1980s. Let me give you an example. When I applied for the position, I applied in September. It'll be 2 years ago this coming September. I got my interview in December. I started the job on April 1st. Now, my understanding is that is light speed for LA County. Because I've been working with another department that has had a Department Information Security Officer position open for 2 years. They just reposted it again now, it's unbelievable because the process that you go through, and some of these departments do seem to do it a little bit faster because it's all done at the department level. We do have a centralized Department of Human Resources, but they don't control the hiring process. The departments do. And so they kind of get to choose what their process is. So some departments can go through it a little bit more quickly, but the reality is, for LA County, and I don't know if this works for these two cities, but if you actually have somebody who's on the market and they apply for an LA County position, let's say they're currently unemployed, by the time they get contacted for an interview, they're going to no longer be available. If I'd actually been on the market from September to December, I wouldn't have been available by December. I had actually no plans to leave King County. I was going to retire there, but you got me down here instead. So don't know whether that's a benefit to anybody, but it is what it is. So our hiring processes are much more extensive. They're much more extended. They're much more detailed and regulated. And I understand that is due to the fact that people love to sue governments for hiring issues. I didn't get the job, so I felt like I got discriminated against for whatever reason, age discrimination, race, gender, whatever it happens to be. So we have so many regulations around this, and they just continue to increase because every new lawsuit brings in another thing that we have to be careful of.
Challenging. Veronica, I think you're dealing with a very small department.
Right. So we have a staff of about 2,600 employees, and I have a staff of maybe 1.5 person.
That's very small.
How do you get a half person? You just hire a short guy?
There you go, an intern. So my full-time staff is an information security analyst, and then I do have a contractor that's working with me to assist with vulnerability management. And I have an enthusiastic intern who majored in policy, but I've been able to sway her over into the cybersecurity realm. So that's near and dear to my heart. So that's the staff. So then the question becomes creatively, how do you make sure that you look at other means of getting work done, right? So we start looking at, I know the buzzwords you guys are going to love, AI and ways of automating certain things, and technologies kind of that help us in that process. For instance, there are security tools that have a capability of doing its own investigative work for you, and then you just kind of look at the results of alerts and of suspicious activities that it has identified. Or you have sort of providers that offer like Overwatch capabilities where they're hands on glass looking at your systems to kind of help you kind of detect suspicious activities, but you're still the person that's actually going through the process of working internally and performing the work. So it just becomes a little more creative as to how you tackle certain things. Of course, it's sort of like a bittersweet thing. I have the ability of kind of setting the strategic framework for building out information security program, and I also can have my hands into the tools, which is probably not always a good thing if you talk to the analyst. But I have that flexibility where I can help out as needed. So, but the goal, of course, is to build up the team, and you have to justify that. So I go through the budgeting process, and he is correct that it's pretty slow. But I'm hopeful that we'll hire more people. I'm pretty hopeful. I have the support of our management staff and the CIO. I don't know if many of you know Rick Cole. He's a proponent of an advocate for cybersecurity, so he understands the importance of it. So it's just a matter of time as we build it out.
Great. Stephen, anything you would add to that?
Yeah, we have the same issue as well. The stuff is, I'd say it's about 1.5 as well right now.
Yeah.
And, management is aware that we have to stuff up. Like my two panelists here mentioned, it's a very long process, very rigorous to hire somebody, and very regimented. There's a job description with a specific salary, So it's hard kind of to be creative when you're hiring. We do have an intern program as well, where we have like 20 interns coming in to the whole TI department. And there's 2 that we've identified that can help out with cybersecurity. They're interested, so that's 2 people who can help out as well. Then, as far as just leveraging, we're trying to make the city employees more security aware, so that maybe that can help with reducing the risk of cybersecurity, and as well using tools as well that have some machine learning or artificial intelligence capabilities that can reduce some of our work. So we have a thin staff, we have a lot of work to do, but management is aware, rather the CIO is aware that we need to shore up our staff and trying to come up with creative ways to hire more people, because a staff of 1.5 or with interns can't really is not enough.
All right.
It's just not enough. Yeah.
We citizens, we have our job to do. We got to show up at the city council meetings and demand they get more funding and more staff. Let me thank you very much for your contributions here. I'd like to turn to you in the audience and see if we have some questions for our panel. Yes, right here.
I don't know if it comes under your purview, but I'm interested to hear you talk about voting and security, and that's something that...
Did everybody hear the question? He was interested to know about voting and security and whether it's within their wheelhouse.
No, not really, but it's a thought that comes up. We're not concerned with voting, but we do. I do get information on that, so I'm kind of aware of what's going on out there in other counties, yeah, but not really.
I can actually address that because voting does fall under the purview of the county. It falls under our Department of Registrar, Recorder, County Clerk, and voting is a major issue for us right now. We are in the process of updating our entire old voting system. Remember we talked about legacy systems? Voting is really interesting. The actual tabulation, the system that actually calculates the votes that is in existence today runs on DOS. Now, did I scare you?
Get your receipts.
Yeah, we're in the process of replacing that. What? We're in the process of replacing that, but part of the problem is that we can't just go buy a system. It has to be certified by the federal government and by the state. So when I was up at King County, we replaced that system. We had to continue running an old system that ran on XP for years beyond the termination of XP, because the application that ran was certified to the operating system level. So even if we could get it to run on Windows 7 or Windows 10, the system was no longer certified because the operating system didn't match what was certified. We finally, up there, got everything replaced. Now, the advantage we had up in Washington, we were all a vote by mail system. So you'd get your ballot in the mail, you'd fill it out, you'd drop it back into mail. Nobody had to go to voting centers, to polling places or anything like that. LA County is going through a new system called VSEP, Voting Systems for All People, I think is what it refers to. And it's going to be much more flexible. You will no longer have to go to a specific polling place. You can go to anything, any of something like, I think it's 2,500 voting centers. You will register there, you'll check in with them. They will pull you up on an online register, and they will then print your ballot for you. You take it into the booth. You do whatever you got to do. All your vote is done electronically, and then it prints out a printed copy, which will go back to the calculation center, the tabulation center, and be scanned in. The other advantage you'll have is you'll be able to vote, to cast your ballot, or at least do your voting on a mobile device. So you'll go in, you'll give the mobile device information about yourself, where you live, so on and so forth. It will give you the proper ballot for your precinct, because precincts are still not going away, even though you don't have to go to a specific polling place. You can cast your ballot on your phone, you take it into the voting center, you scan the QR code into another system, it prints out your ballot with the votes that you cast, and you can validate that. If it's not correct, you can make a change on your phone, print out another ballot, and then submit that ballot. So it's going to be much more flexible. This is supposed to be in place by the 2020 general election.
Do we have time for one more?
Quite exciting.
We're a little over. Can we do one more? Yeah, you've got the mic. I'm sorry. Fight it out, guys.
Moshi, I'll defer to Moshi.
Okay, you win. Please.
Just a quick question. Has there ever been an effort to outsource the activities of your cities?
The question was, has there been an effort to outsource
Yeah.
city-provided
City services,
technologies?
Well, I don't know if I can say that there's an initiative to outsource the support staff. I know that technically I kind of feel like we're outsourcing some of the services we have. We're depending upon cloud providers to perform, like a SaaS application to perform the service for us. So really, we as IT, the only thing we do if there's an issue is we call them and say, hey, look, we're having an issue. Can you solve it? So that's really a form of outsourcing in my mind. I know at one point before, I'm going to speak to you for a minute, because I remember I used to work for the city of Long Beach, and I remember there was some discussions around, before I left, with the prior CIO, there was some discussions around maybe outsourcing, and I think the mayor was like, no, I like IT. We don't want to outsource. Let's just build it out. So that was prior to your attending. And but yeah, so I don't know if that has changed. I know Leah is doing a pretty good job of trying to, build things out. I guess you can kind of speak to that.
Yeah, like Veronica mentioned, that's been thought about in the past, and I think an analysis was performed between comparing, keeping staff and outsourcing, and the decision was made to, to keep it as it is, because the numbers just worked out, better the same way.
If you had your way, would you do it?
Essentially, the city is there to serve citizens, so ultimately it has to be the right cost to outsource. So if you're outsourcing and it's more expensive, you got to use the money wisely, because it's limited resources pretty much. So yeah, so
And-
you got to do that.
And
math,
from a county perspective, we do use MSPs under certain circumstances, but I seriously doubt that the county would ever go to a fully outsourced IT and security platform.
So I'd like to thank all of you for your attention and support for the panel today. Please join me in a round of applause for the panel, and I want to thank you. Thank you all.
Sounds like you're having fun with it.
Oh, yeah, we're having a good time.
This is exciting. Thank you so much.
All right, we'd like to bring our sponsors up here. Please hold it. A few more. We got a few more items of business, please. Sorry. I don't know anything about it. So got our sponsors. We've got gifts up here for our sponsors. We're going to set up our poll. Cannon? Yeah, please. All right, so again, thank you to our sponsors. Again, want to note we have coming up a Day of Innovation on October 10th. It's a full day of to do some great programs. Are we going to run our poll? Yes. So we're going to do a poll here. We like to gather information on what people would like for upcoming topics, so get your phones ready. Be a quick.
Yeah, it's at the back of the brochure of the program. There's a QR code. You can just scan it on your phone. Oh, here we go. Yeah, it's okay. We'll just do the keywords. If you scan it and I start, just answer this one question.
Let's give us some input for upcoming programs.
Everybody say backup. There you go.
There we go.
Yeah, much better.
Give people a moment here to finish their typing. All right, looks like most everyone's finished up. So again, I want to extend my thanks to our sponsors, but also very especially to our speakers and panelists for putting the time to prepare and to present today. And thanks to all of you for coming and attending. There's going to be some light lunch out there and have an hour to mingle and network. Thank you very much.
Yes.